All right, are we all set?
Ready to go, June?
Karen, thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to have this opportunity to discuss this new, exciting, and challenging time we are in as we're getting ready for visits to our schools from immigration and customs enforcement, as well as potentially other federal agencies. And my goal today is to really bring you up to date on the latest news about these upcoming federal visits to SEVIS-approved schools. And we're going to discuss who these federal agents might be, why they're coming, and what they're going to be looking for, and how you might be able to prepare. Now, these are all or largely immigration and customs enforcement agents that are coming, but there is one other potential agency that could come to your school, even though probably it would be an outside chance. But I still wanted to tell you that they exist, so in case they surprise someone on campus, you would not be uninformed about the potential of their visit. But what probably got you here today at this webinar is the recent deployment of SEVP field representatives that were deployed, gee whiz, just like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago on April 17th. SEVP, of course, is the Student and Exchange Visitor Program, which oversees school compliance and the F1 student program and SEVIS itself. We are really in a whole new world with these field representatives being hired and deployed. They have just finished going through an 8-week training program in Washington and have been sending out their announcements that they're going to be coming to schools to visit. And I'm really quite surprised that they have been contacting elementary, secondary schools simultaneously with colleges and universities. I thought that they would be contacting colleges and universities first, but that does not seem to be the case. This is the first group of 15 field representatives that have been deployed. Eventually there will be 60 nationwide, and each one of these officers has a group of schools that they are responsible for. And they're going to be looking to schools to develop relationships with you at your schools to make sure that you are informed about your responsibilities under the federal regulations, to provide you with any assistance and training even that you might need. But really the key here is that they are looking for making sure that your school is doing what it is required to do in accordance with the federal regulations. I believe that the first meetings are going to be quite warm and fuzzy as they strive to develop relationships with you. Also, they're all going to be in a learning curve themselves about your school, so I don't expect that this is going to be really an uncomfortable first visit, but please remember that their goal is to make sure that the school is in compliance with federal requirements. So that is what they are mainly looking for. Eventually, this will be going on twice a year. They're supposed to meet with all the schools that they are responsible for on a twice-a-year basis. So this is going to become a normal part of our everyday lives as we go forward. And as I said, it's something completely new that none of us have had any experience with before, because this is not something that the federal government has ever done before. As to what may have triggered this kind of field representative being hired by the government and this becoming a new focus. You may have heard in the news or may not have heard in the news in the last few years a number of schools were closed by SEVP because they were not properly following federal requirements. Mainly they were fraudulent schools. And so that when that occurred, that raised this whole issue about how do we know if schools are doing what they are required to do. And so I believe myself, I don't have any real, clear information that that was the trigger for this, but it seems to be logical that that is what caused it. Now, another group of agents who may visit your school, which probably is certainly not as likely as the field representatives that are supposed to build long-term relationships and come and visit you twice a year. This group of people, if they come to your school, it's going to be very rare that this would occur. These folks are from Immigration and Customs Enforcement's Homeland Security Investigations branch, specifically the Counterterrorism and Criminal Exploitation Unit. Whew, that's a long name. Or the CTCEU. Now, the CTCEU has created a joint initiative with SEVP called the Project Campus Sentinel. Project Campus Sentinel provides school officials with the tools to help them identify possible threats to national security within the F1 student population, as well as provides them with a proper way to report any information to the government about possible threats. So CTCEU's goal is to build partnerships between ICE field offices and SEVP schools to detect and combat school and student fraud of the F1 program. So this unit has an abuse focus, meaning are there schools that are not really bona fide schools bringing students over who are not really bona fide students. So this is the unit that investigates fraud. Now, how might this unit relate to the SEVP field representatives? Potentially, it could be that they share information. So if a field representative may get the idea that a school is not quite on the up and up, then that information could possibly trigger the CTCEU looking at the school in terms of a abuse, from an abuse standpoint. So this would be very unlikely that this would occur at your institutions. Now, the agency that is not under ICE that could potentially, even though it's an outside chance, come to your school, I believe they're mostly going to colleges, is an agent with the FBI. And there is what they call, the FBI has a joint terrorism task force. They call this the Campus Liaison Initiative. Excuse me. The FBI has determined that educational institutions are potentially soft targets for terrorism. And so that this task force is seeking to raise awareness about campus vulnerabilities. And so they may potentially contact the institution to come and want to give a presentation to public safety officers and other school personnel about how to detect, deter, and disrupt any potential threats that could be potentially at your institution. So they would be very possibly going directly to the public safety officers. I believe that I have not heard of them going to secondary schools as of yet, but the potential is there, so it would be wise to communicate that there is this potential to the administration at your school. So that is an introduction to who these folks are, who they potentially might be, and now what is it that an SEVP field representative would be looking for when he or she comes to your school. Well, as I said, the field reps will be looking to see if the school is in compliance with F1 requirements, meaning is it a bona fide school following all the rules? So that is their focus. Now, what are the school compliance rules? There are federal regulations that you folks have certified to the government that you read and understand, and that was required of you in order to become a SEVIS-designated school official. You certified to the feds that you understood the government's requirements for your students and your institution. So if you just clicked that little box saying, yes, I read and understood them, and you really don't, you are still held accountable for reading and understanding these regulations. So the citation for how you might look these all up is right here on your screen, and I'm going to show you how to access the federal regulations that you are responsible for. So as a SEVIS-approved school, these are your specific requirements, and there's a lot within each one of these that I could go on about probably an hour on each one of these topics, but I'm just going to introduce this to you. As an SEVP-approved school, you may only operate as the government allowed you to operate. So when you filed your petition for school approval with the government, and they said, yes, it looks like you're a bona fide school, then you continue to operate as that authorization allowed you to. If any of the information about your school ever changes or changed, then you are required to report it. And sometimes reporting it requires you to obtain approval for those changes. So if you now are deciding to add, for example, a post-secondary year to your curriculum, and you never did that before, you only provided secondary education, and now you want to add that, or you want to add a summer camp, for example, these things have to be approved by the government before you can start issuing I-20s for these things. So there's a lot involved in keeping your school's authorization current. The next thing that you have to do is to make sure that you are in compliance with all the conditions for issuance of the Form I-20. And you must report on all of your students as the federal regulation requires you to report on your students. And you must keep records on all of this. You must maintain records on your school. You must maintain records on your students. So this is just the briefest of introduction to what your compliance responsibilities are. When we're talking about keeping records on school information, the best practice is that you keep evidence that supports how you were approved by the SEVP for your school. So when you filed your Form I-17 petition for school approval, you proved to the government that you were an established, bona fide school. And you did that by providing a whole pile of information about your school, including catalogs about your courses and evidence of your facilities and your faculty and all of that. The best practice is to keep all the copies of all the supporting evidence that you submitted to the government whenever you were doing anything relative to your school's approval. If you've made changes to your school approval, informed them of that, then you should keep evidence of those updates and evidence of the updates having been submitted in a timely fashion, because federal requirements are that updates must be submitted within a certain time frame. You must have evidence that it was done within that time frame. If you've had any correspondence with SEVP relative to your school's approval, always keep that evidence of correspondence. If it's an email, keep a folder where you keep those email correspondence with the government. This is all very good recommended practice, so that in case you have to prove anything to anyone who may ask relevant to your school's approval, you have all of this to back you up. As to students, what are you required to keep? You are required to keep evidence on students that you've issued a Form I-20 to who came to your school. So if you issued an I-20 to students and then they never enrolled at your school, then you are not required to keep any of that on file for the government. Only F1 students who actually came and enrolled, then you are required to keep evidence of their student data that the government requires. And you must keep that information all the way through their enrollment at your school, up until the time that you tell them that the student has graduated your institution. Your students do not have practical training, so this will not apply to you. So only while your students are enrolled all the way up until they graduate. And then beyond that, you are required to keep your records for a 3-year period. I recommend that you keep it in compliance with your record-keeping system at your school as long as it is minimally 3 years. Most schools have a longer retention rate than that, but minimally it must be retained for a 3-year period. Student information doesn't have to all be in the same place. It can be in a variety of offices. However, it must be accessible to designated school officials who may have to provide this to a federal representative coming to visit. And the records may be in electronic or hard copy, depending on whatever system is in use at the school. So it's not something that has to all be paper. That's really good news for us who have overflowing file cabinets. Now, what data are you legally accountable for to be keeping on your students at your school? Everything starts once the I-20 has been issued. So when you issue the Form I-20, you must keep evidence that the student met all of the admission requirements for your school, was fully admitted prior to issuance of the Form I-20, and that you have evidence that the student is capable of supporting himself or herself for the full length of the program of study. This is the evidence that you're going to have to keep on all of your F1 students to whom you've issued I-20s and have enrolled at your school. You're required to keep proof that this person is F1, and that proof is most commonly in the form of the I-94 or the admission stamp that CBP, Customs and Border Protection, issued when they admitted the student into the United States. It's a really good practice to get both. So when a new student arrives, you get copies of their admission stamp and print out the form I-94 from the CBP portal. You're required to keep all of their academic records at your institution. And you are required to keep supporting evidence for all SEVIS actions and data that you have performed on your students while they're at your school. So I always like to emphasize that every SEVIS action has a legal foundation. So you're used to seeing SEVIS student records, I'm sure, but every one of these actions has a legal foundation behind it. So you are required to be able to prove every time you performed one of these actions that it met the federal requirements for doing that. So if you extended the student's program because the student needed a summer to finish up something, you have to be able to prove that the student qualified for that, because it's not just a gift of more time. There are special requirements for being able to give this additional time to a student. So always remember that you're going to be held accountable for being able to prove that each one of these actions was performed in accordance with federal requirements. So I've given you just the very briefest overview of the record-keeping aspects of what we are responsible for. In the handout that that we've provided with this webinar, I've given you more detail as well on student data. So you can take a look at that as well when you have more time and you want to go into this a little bit more in depth. So what are you required to report? Well, when we're dealing with this new SEVP field representative, I'm trying to speculate as to the nature of their visits, and we are going into uncharted territory here because all of the reporting regulations that exist on student data pertain to the government asking for specific student records. So was Jose enrolled full-time? I predict that this visit with SEVP field representatives is going to go also into a whole different area, which I'm going to go into a little bit more in a following screen. So, but as far as student records, your students can request any of the data, the government can request any of the data on your students that we have just discussed. I did add one other citation here that was not in your presentation handout. I put G1 and G2. So all of the reporting requirements and record-keeping requirements are found in 214.3 G1 and 2. So any government officer, any DHS officer, or one of its representatives could come and ask the school to provide student data. And the regulations say that they can request it upon notice. Upon notice is not defined. It could be that an officer comes and simply asks about, show me your records on all of your students to whom you've issued I-20s. Show me 5. I'll give you 5 names. Show me that they all had sufficient funding for their full program of study. That could be notice. Or notice could be an email that we're going to want to review specific records on a specific set of students, on an individual student or a class of students. You may request this in writing, and it is recommended that you request this in writing. So if somebody were to ask you in the course of a visit that I would like to see X number of records on some students, then you should ask to have that in writing to follow up so that you have this in a record that it was provided in accordance with the federal regulations in writing. Now, your response, by regulation, you have 3 working days to respond if you are being asked for records for individual students. You have 10 working days if you are being asked for records for a whole group or class of students. You must give the information to an officer verbally if the student is under arrest already. And you can follow up asking for written notification after the fact, but you must give it the same day. But if somebody says, I want to see 10 records on a student, the question is, are you going to drop on everything and start looking for those 10 records? Well, you need to know that legally you have time to deal with this if need be. And you're going to have to decide how you're going to handle this, but you need to know what the regulations do say about when and how you must provide this information to a federal officer. FERPA is waived for information that is required by federal regulation to support the F1 student program. So you cannot say that we cannot provide you with the information that we've just been discussing because of FERPA. So if the federal regulations for your F1 student program require reporting of this data, then FERPA is waived on those students. So FERPA protects only data that is not required by federal regulation. Okay, so are you prepared for a visit from Homeland Security by ICE, by your SEVP field representative or a CTCEU representative coming? And really, to me, everything here starts with training. What I was alluding to a few slides back was the issue related to training. There's nothing in the regulations that really describe what could go on in a visit where a field representative is talking to a designated school official or a principal designated school official and trying to make an assessment about the level of expertise of that individual. As I said earlier, you are held responsible for knowing the regulations and for being able to sit and have a clearly articulate conversation with the officer. So normally, a field representative will be making a beeline for the principal designated school official, but that person could also be wanting to have a conversation with a regular designated school official. Are you going to be able to sit down and have a conversation about your institution's compliance responsibilities? So the officer is not only looking at the level of compliance with record keeping relative to student data or school data, but the level of compliance of a designated school official in terms of expertise and know-how about the F1 regulations and the SEVIS system. So you are accountable and your institution is accountable because they are the ones ultimately responsible for how well designated school officials are performing their duties. So you need to know your school's compliance responsibilities. You need to be clear about how well trained are we in F1 regulations and school regulations. Are we doing what we are required to do? Are we aware of what we are required to do? So this is going to be another whole level of evaluation that I see going on with the field representatives. So a field representative could potentially identify that a DSO is not particularly knowledgeable and does need some training and support as to how that will play out and what will need to be done later on. We don't yet see, and I'm not even sure if they know, because this is all new, don't forget. So you need to take a look at, are we doing what we're supposed to do? Do we know what we're supposed to know? Who else at your institution knows about the field representatives coming out and potentially any of the other federal representatives? But specifically right now, most urgently, excuse me for the phone, I forgot to turn it off. The federal representatives coming to you most imminently. You need to educate the head of school about the compliance duties, because compliance is the institution's responsibility, and that's what this is all about. So how knowledgeable are your higher-ups about the nature of what you do? Many of you are really strapped. I know, because I've trained a number of you, and you all have multiple functions at your school, and this is often very low on the list of priorities of your institution. So, but you need to educate them about compliance and the government's visit, because we are going into this whole new world. We also need to know how we're going to handle a government visit when, you know, somebody is coming. Who's going to do it? What if I'm not in the office that day? How is this going to be handled? Who else is going to want to be involved, you know, with this? And are we going to, if we are asked for specific student records that day, are we going to drop everything that we are doing and go look for them, or are we going to be requesting the 3 to 10 day window that legally we are entitled to request for such a visit? So you need to think about how this is going to play out, and stay in touch with what is going on in the field, and see how this is going to be working out at other schools. We're going to be learning a lot from each other as well. Once you know what you're going to be held accountable for, don't panic. I mean, everybody's new at this. Just take a deep breath, relax, be as truthful as you can, but start thinking it all through as to what is this going to look like, and give them the information that they are required to receive from you. So that's my overall introduction to this experience that we're all going to be embarking upon together. But there is more work that needs to be done on your part. I'm June Sadowski-Devarez. I'm the President of International Education Training Services. We have been training designated school officials for 25 years. We're based in New York City. We provide workshops, regular ongoing workshops in compliance. There's one that's coming up this month in New York City. We will offer it again, very possibly late summer, and we offer it in December as well. So this is the kind of workshop that summarizes all the compliance responsibilities of a school, and not just for designated school officials, but for school administrators who want to know what our institutional compliance responsibility is. If you have never been properly trained in what your duties are as a SEVIS designated school official, I really don't know how you're doing your job, because this requires training. And I know a number of people that are listening to me today have been trained by me, and I'm sure they can vouch for how important training is in this area. And we have an F1 SEVIS Basics program for elementary and secondary schools that go into what every designated school official must know in order to do this job. And we also provide consultation services if schools want to have compliance reviews, that I often go on site and look at schools and tell them whether they are in compliance with federal requirements or not, and what would need to be fixed in order to bring them into compliance. So that IETS is there for you as a resource, and you can reach me by phone or email, and I'm happy to help you as you get the resources you need to be able to respond to any federal representative that is going to be coming and looking at your school's activities regarding F1 students. So I'm done, Karen, and I'm happy to start answering questions.
Terrific, June. We actually have quite a few.
Good.
Yes. The first one is from Jacqueline. She's asking, will there be any prior notification for visits from SEVIS authorities?
At this stage with the SEVP representatives, yes. Schools have been receiving notices saying, I will be calling you in the next 2 weeks to schedule a meeting. But they are not legally required to give notice. So I believe in this first meeting, for sure, we're going to receive notice. We know that because I know some of you are listening who already have received notices that you're going to be contacted and for scheduling an appointment. But as we go forward, the answer is not necessarily. So it could be that someone just drops by and says, hi, Susie, I'm here. And certainly if it's the CTCEU, I would not expect any notice at all, because surprise is half of the element for the CTCEU to see if a school is doing the right thing. So the answer is both yes and no.
Okay, thank you. Emily's asking, they're saying they're going to have meetings twice annually. She says starting as early as next school year?
No, starting now. They are out in the field now. There are some schools that are having their meetings as we speak. There are other schools that are scheduled within the next 2 weeks. So it's all a matter of when the officers are going to be contacting you. Now, as I said, we only are in the first group of 15 field representatives. And so they are definitely focusing in on high dense populations. In New York City, where I'm located, we have many schools that have been contacted. But if you're in Ohio, you may not be receiving any notices, and it may be a while yet. So 15 people means that there's probably just like 5 people per region available, and they're not going to get to everybody. So they have their priorities. So some places they're getting them right now, and other places you might not see them for 6 months. It's going to depend on where your school is.
Okay, thank you. Sarah's asking, is there a consequence through these visits for serving domestic students who are undocumented residents?
None. No. There is nothing in any federal regulation that prohibits a school from enrolling undocumented or illegal aliens, I mean students who are out of status. So no, that would never be an issue.
Okay, thank you. Sherry's asking, can we use our website instead of a catalog? We no longer use a catalog or a view book.
Well, you keep copies of what currently existed when you were applying for your approval. So you're talking about supporting evidence for any school data. So if you petitioned for school approval with a view book 2 years ago, you need to keep a copy of that view book. If you no longer have a view book, and you've been approved without one, well, then you need to make sure that you keep copies of how your website looked at the time of the approval, because you could change your website and then it will look different. So in other words, you are approved at a moment in time based on the evidence that was submitted at a moment in time, even if it's a website. So you have to keep evidence of what that looked like at that moment.
Okay, thank you. Amanda's asking, do you recommend that records live with the PDSO, or is it okay if they live with a DSO?
It doesn't really matter as long as they're accessible, but you must make sure that your PDSO is knowledgeable. I'm waiting for this to be an issue at a number of schools, because at many schools the PDSO is not a hands-on knowledgeable person in this area. There are many schools that seem to believe that the PDSO should be a senior administrator, and the government's view is that a PDSO is the most knowledgeable about the federal requirements and regulations. So that person can have delegated all the record keeping and such to a DSO who keeps the records, but that does not mean that the PDSO will not be held accountable for being thoroughly knowledgeable and the expert.
Great, thank you. Jennifer is asking, with regards to the financial support requirement, is the amount required on the bank statement the annual cost plus expenses, or an amount for all the years through graduation?
What I would say is you need training in what the federal standards are for financial documents, because a bank statement is not considered to be acceptable standards of evidence. So it sounds to me like you need to get training.
Okay, thank you. Sharon is asking, we're required for evidence of every change, but that data is in the SEVIS database. Do we print screen or what?
The evidence for every change is not in SEVIS. All that happens is SEVIS reports a change. It's not the evidence that the student qualified or the school did the change properly. So you have to keep evidence that whatever, for example, let's give an example. If you reported the student is a full-time student, that's not evidence. So you performed the SEVIS registration action. The evidence then that the student was full-time is going to be the transcript or the academic record of the student. So you have to keep evidence at all times that that student was full-time every academic term when you reported the student. If the student was given a medical leave so that the student then could get treatment for a medical condition in the United States and was granted a leave for an academic term, you have to provide evidence that the student was qualified for the reduced course load that was granted to the student. There are legal conditions for who can be given a reduced course load, for what circumstance allows it, and you have to keep proof that that student qualified for the SEVIS action you performed in the system.
Okay, thank you. Jesse is typing in from a boarding high school. He said he believes you mentioned the need to have records of a family's financial ability to pay for the cost of attendance, cost of living, etc. It has been our understanding that families are required to provide proof of finances during their visa interview with an embassy or consulate. As such, we do not have records that duplicate these efforts. Please clarify.
An institution is required to see the evidence the student can pay the costs of living and studying in the United States for the full length of the program of study before an I-20 is issued. That evidence is then used when the student goes to get the visa. So the student takes that same evidence or copies. You would keep the copies and the student would take the original documents to get the visa. You are legally required to be able to prove to the government that your school is looking at the appropriate financial documents. If you do not have that evidence, you would not be in compliance with federal requirements. So the answer is that you are the first hurdle. That's the word I was looking for. You're the first hurdle. The school has to determine whether or not the family can afford it before the I-20 is issued. The student then takes that I-20 along with the evidence that you saw to get the visa.
Okay, thank you. Brittany is asking, she had a question about the length of time to keep proof of compliance for each student. She said you mentioned 3 years, but it looks like 214.3G says 1 year. The school must keep a record of having complied with the reporting requirements for at least 1 year. Is she looking at outdated information?
I don't know what she's looking at. It's 3 years.
Okay. Janice is asking, since over 90% of the information is geared to colleges and universities, how can primary and secondary schools get to the information that we need to know? Is there training just for that level?
Everything I'm telling you is for secondary schools. There's nothing that I've told you that is just for colleges and universities. We're dealing with all the federal regulations, and the F1 SEVIS Basics program is only for elementary and secondary schools. I have a whole separate training program for colleges and universities. But what we're discussing today and what I have given you in this presentation and in the handouts specifically applies to all SEVIS approved schools. So it's no different for a college or a university. It's just that usually colleges and universities have more evidence to keep because they have more situations occur than high schools do.
Okay. Amanda's asking, she says she recently took over as DSO. She said our previous PDSO never kept records of the Form I-94 or CVP admission stamp. Do you recommend that I get this information before the students leave in early June, or should we wait until September?
I think you can wait until September. That's a judgment call on your own. I mean, if they're still there and it's easy enough for you to get it now, I probably would want to have the records. I'm a nervous Nelly about records. I always believe in dotting every I, crossing every T with the government because you never know what you're going to be asked. What are the chances that you could be asked for that evidence before September? I really don't know.
Okay, thank you. We've had a couple of questions about proof of financing and funding. People are wondering if they need to show proof of it for each year or just the year that they will be admitted.
Can you say that last part again, Karen? You were cut off.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Do families need to show proof of funding for each year?
At the time you are issuing the I-20, you must have seen evidence of the ability of the family to pay for the full length of the program of study. You don't have to redocument that in another year. It's only when you are issuing the I-20 that you are required to see the ability to support the child. I do a webinar, and there's actually a webinar on my website on proving student funding. So if you folks who are interested in getting more information on this funding, I do have a an online webinar that you can listen to that goes into all the federal requirements for proving student funding. I'm also planning to do it live again probably in the next couple of months. So if you are interested in getting on our mailing list so that we can tell you about webinars and training that we have coming up, you can go to our website, which is ietstraining.com, and sign up so that we can make sure you get this information.
Great, thank you so much. On that note, Alicia was asking if you know of any SEVIS compliance training seminars in the Midwest.
No, I do not. In the Midwest, I do not. There is a DSO training program that Immigration and Customs Enforcement has itself that's free, an online web-based training program. So you can go into ICE's website and look that up. If you haven't heard of a website called Study in the States, you can also Google that. That's SEVP's website that gives a lot of information to schools. Study in the States. And it also links up to ice.gov where you can go in and look at the other resources that are available to DSOs. This training aspect of this is key because, as I said, the heart of everything here is going to be the training that you folks have received. One little known fact is that your school promised that you would receive adequate resources and training to do this job when you were appointed as a SEVIS designated school official. So that is why the school is held accountable for the level of training that you have and the expertise that you have. So if you make a mistake, it's not you who are individually held accountable. If that is a serious issue, it's going to be your school that is held accountable.
Thank you, June. Jane is asking if any information should be kept readily available on host families.
No, nothing. I mean, if a host family is sponsoring someone financially, then the answer would be yes. I mean, if that host family is providing free room and board to a student, then that person is a financial sponsor, then that evidence would be part of the I-20 issuance evidence that would be needed.
Okay, thank you. Nancy is asking, how do we access the CBP website to get copies of I-94 forms?
What I recommend you do is Google Form I-94 and see what comes up. There is a special link for going and getting the information online. Again, that's part of training. But you can Google I-94, and you could Google cbp.gov and then go within the search mode of CBP and ask Form I-94, and it should take you to the various places where that is mentioned, including the portal.
Thank you. We have several questions about who the SEVP reps will be contacting to set up the visits. Will that be the DSOs or the PDSOs?
I would say that at the moment it might be going to everybody, meaning whoever is listed as a DSO for your institution. Normally by practice, as I said, the PDSO is the point person for the federal government. That's usually the first person they want to talk to about compliance issues, but I'm not sure if it is going to everyone. And so we'd have to rely on the experience of what is happening out in the field to determine whether it's the PDSO and all DSOs are being notified.
Gina's asking, will every school receive a visit?
Eventually.
Okay.
Eventually, every SEVIS-approved school is supposed to have visits twice a year.
Okay. Also, we've been asked, what happens if you don't meet the regulations during the visit?
Well, then what can happen is that you would be triggered for an out-of-cycle review. An out-of-cycle review is where the government would have determined that based on the evidence the school is not doing what it's supposed to be doing, and so an out-of-cycle review would be basically a review of whether or not your SEVIS approval should continue. So it would be just like the recertification process. If they then determine that your school is not doing what it's supposed to do, it's grounds for withdrawal of your school's approval.
Okay, thank you. Annika is asking, does it matter if DSOs have records in different places? For example, the DSO of the admission office has new student information, and the other DSO, the school administrator, holds records in their office.
No, not at all. This is very typical that usually admissions documents are kept in admissions, and then post-enrollment immigration support is kept by the DSO that actually works with the students and reports on the students. The only issue is that they be accessible. So that meaning that if the government wants to see the admissions documents, that you know how to lay your hands on them.
Okay, thank you. Jenna's asking, if the student is here on a full scholarship and the family does not have to pay, is there anything that needs to be done on proof of ability to pay?
Well, the school has to prove that the student's full scholarship is promised to the student for the full length of the program, and that whatever the evidence of that would be, whether it's a letter, normally it would be a letter, I would assume, that would be kept as the evidence, and that must cover all the expenses, living, personal, and educational.
Thank you. We had Sharon ask if we could send the link to the free DSO training. If you'd like to give me that, June, I will put that on the web page when I post the recorded webinar, as well as your slides and the handout.
I didn't quite follow what they want, Karen.
The link to the DSO training.
Oh, I can give you that. Yes.
Okay, great.
Definitely.
Great. So I'll put that on the same page, everyone, with the other resources as well. Alicia's asking if you've heard any anecdotes from schools about how the first visits have been going so far.
I have not heard any anecdotes yet, and I've got my feelers out everywhere, and no one has reported back yet. But as soon as I know, then I'll be adjusting everything. But it's going to be, watch the news, watch the, if you're members of NAFSA, which I strongly recommend that schools be members of NAFSA. NAFSA has a DSO listserv where people share, war stories and ask questions of each other. And I'm looking for this earliest information to start popping up on the NAFSA listservs, but nothing yet.
Okay, thank you. We still do have quite a few questions. I'm sure we're not going to be able to get to these even if we do go a few minutes over, and at this point we're about 4 minutes over our allotted time. I'm going to give June about 2 more questions, and please be aware that I'm going to be sending her a report after this webinar is over that contains your names as well as the questions that you did type in, so that June will be able to take a look at some of them, and she may be able to get back to you individually. If not, it's going to be very difficult to get to these.
Or you can send it to me at IETS, the email address on your screen.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, let's see here. Amanda's asking, if the PDSO is not the most knowledgeable, should we put in a petition now to change this, or is it better to wait until after the first visit?
The PDSO should always be the most knowledgeable, and so there is absolutely no reason not to switch that now. That change does not require adjudication. So if you're saying that there is another DSO who really should be the PDSO, that's an easy switch on the I-17.
Great, thank you. The last question I'm going to address is from Loretta. She says she is the PDSO and she has 3 DSOs. However, she's the only person issuing I-20s and handling all issues with SEVIS. She's very concerned that if an agent meets with these DSOs who have never issued an I-20, do you have any suggestions for that?
I don't recommend that untrained people be DSOs, because remember that when that DSO became a DSO, he or she certified that she had the knowledge and understanding to do the job. If that's not true, those people should be removed.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, June. I think we're probably at the end of our question session at this point. As I said, I'm going to be forwarding these to June, but also feel free to contact her directly. She's very generously offered to give you her phone number and her email address. So June, if you'd like to make a couple of closing remarks, I'll pop in after that and give our closing as well.
Well, thank you, Karen, and thank you for inviting me to talk today. And I really hope that I see you at a future workshop or webinar. But if you have questions, in general, I'm happy to be able to answer your questions in the future. So give me a buzz or send me an email, and thank you again for inviting me.
I want to thank our audience for tuning in, and a special thank you to June for providing us with this insightful webinar. Just a reminder, a recording of this presentation, as well as June's slides and handout, will be made available on the webinar page in the professional development section on admission.org. All registrants will receive a link to this page tomorrow. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.